They laughed when he married the alien Outcast. But then Alien Girl revealed her true power. Colony ship landed on Earth with a sound that shook the ground beneath their feet, and everyone gathered at the landing site to see the visitors from beyond the stars. And among the crowd stood Jake Miller, a simple mechanic who fixed broken machines in his small workshop at the edge of town. Aliens emerged from their ship tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered like moonlight on water, and eyes that held the depth of galaxies, and the humans whispered among themselves, pointing at the strange beings who had traveled so far to make contact with their world. But one alien walked differently from the rest, and her name was Zara, and she moved with her head down, her shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller, and the other aliens kept their distance from her, and some even turned away. When Pasechik watched as the alien delegation met with the human leaders, and he noticed how Zara stood at the back, always silent, always apart, and something in her isolation called to him, because he knew what it felt like to be different, to be the one nobody wanted around. Integration program began, and aliens were paired with human families to learn about Earth culture, and when the assignments were announced, nobody wanted Zara, and the room fell silent as her name was called again and again with no response. Jake raised his hand and the coordinator looked at him with surprise and asked if he was certain, and Jake nodded and said yes. He would take her into his home, and people laughed and whispered behind their hands, saying the lonely mechanic had finally lost his Minjara moved into the small house Jake owned at the edge of town, and she brought almost nothing with her, just a single bag that seemed a light to contain a life. And she barely spoke those first few days, only nodding or shaking her head when Jake asked her questions. She gave her the spare bedroom and told her she could stay as long as she needed, and she looked at him with those deep alien eyes filled with something he could not quite read, and whispered, "Thank you," a voice like wind through leaves town. People mocked Jake whenever he went to the market or the supply store, and they asked him why he had taken in the broken alien, the outcast that even her own kind did not want, and Jake simply smiled and said, "Everyone deserves kinna." Shara began to help around the house in small ways, and she would clean the kitchen, while Jake worked in his shop, and she tended the small garden behind the house, coaxing plants to grow with a gentle touch, and slowly the vegetables became larger and healthier than they had ever been known. Evening, Jake came home to find Zara sitting on the floor surrounded by pieces of his broken machines, and she had taken them apart carefully, laying each component in neat rows. And when he asked what she was doing, she said she wanted to understand how things worked on Earth. Sat beside her, began to explain the function of each part, and she listened with intense focus, asking questions that showed she understood concepts he had never even considered, and together they rebuilt the machines, but they worked better than before, more efficient and powerful. Weeks passed, and Zara began to speak more, and she told Jake about her homeworld, about crystal cities that reached into purple skies and oceans that sang with bioluminescent life, and she told him why she was an outcast in her world. She had been born different, and her people valued strength and aggression, but Zara was gentle and thoughtful, and she questioned the old ways, the wars her people fought across the stars, and for this she was branded as weak, as broken, and when the delegation was chosen for Earth, her people sent her hoping she would simply disappear. Jake felt anger rise in his chest, and he told her that being kind was not weakness, that questioning was not broken, and Zara looked at him with tears in her alien eyes, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, she smiled. Seasons changed, and Zara became part of Jake's life, and they worked together in his shop, and she showed him alien technology that could revolutionize human machines, and he showed her the beauty in simple earthly things like coffee in the morning and old music on scratched records. Town people continued to laugh, and they called Jake a fool for wasting his time on the alien reject, and some even suggested that Zara was dangerous, that she should be sent back to her people, and Jake defended, always standing firm against the mockery and suspicion. Then one day the sky turned dark and ships appeared overhead, but they were not friendly vessels, and they belonged to the Krell, a warlike species that had been enemies with Zara's people for generations, and they had followed the colony ship to Earth seeking to destroy any alien presence. They found Krell ships fired on the human cities and defenses, and the Earth forces scrambled to respond, but their weapons were primitive compared to the alien technology in the Krell ships. shrugged off missiles and railgun fire like rain. Again, stone panic spread through the town and people ran for shelters in the alien delegation prepared to evacuate, but their ship had been damaged in the first attack and could not launch, and the humans faced annihilations as stood at the window of Jake's house, watching the destruction, and Jake asked her what they could do, and she turned to him with a strange calm in her eyes and said she could stop them, but if she did, everyone would know what she truly was. Jake took her hand and told her that whatever she was, it did not matter, and that the people who mocked her did not deserve her help, but she should do what her heart told her was right. Zara walked outside, and the wind picked up around her, and her skin began to glow, not with the soft shimmer it usually held, but with a brilliant radiance that grew brighter and brighter until people had to shield. Their eyes rose into the air, and her body transformed, and she grew larger, her form shifting into something magnificent and terrible, and wings of pure energy spread from her back, and her eyes blazed with power that could unmake worlds. People who had laughed at her now watched in terror and awe as Zara flew toward the Krell ships, and she moved faster than any earthly craft, and when she reached the first ship, she touched it, and the vessel simply stopped and fell from the sky, inert and harmless. Krell fleet turned their weapons on her, and they fired everything they had, and energy beams and missiles converged on her position, but Zara raised her hand and the attacks dissolved into nothing, and she moved through the fleet like a force of nature, unstoppable and absolutely owned by one. Krell ships fell, and Zara did not destroy them with violence, but with something else, and she touched each vessel and drained their power systems, leaving them floating dead in space, and the invasion ended in Minitasha descended back to Earth, and her form returned to normal, and she landed in the town square, where everyone had gathered, and they stared at her with new eyes filled with fear and wonder and respect. Alien delegation came forward, and the leader looked at Zara with shame on his face, and he spoke in their musical language and told her that they had been wrong, and that her power had been hidden even from them, and that she was not an outcast, but a guardian, one of the ancient protectors that appeared once every 1,000 generations. Zara had not been weak, and her gentleness had not been a flaw, and it had been a manifestation of the incredible power she carried, and power so great that it required absolute control and perfect peace to contain. And her people had not understood, and they had cast her out for the very thing that made her special. Human leaders approached, and they thanked Zara and offered her anything she wanted, and she looked at them all, and then turned and walked back to Jake, who stood at the edge of the crowd, and she took his hand, and said she wanted to go home to the small house at the edge of town. The people who had mocked Jake praised him, and they said he had been wise to take in the powerful alien, and that he must have known all along what she was. And Jake laughed and told them he had not known anything, and that he had simply seen someone who needed Kindashara. And Jake returned to their quiet life, and the world had changed around them, but they remained the same, and she still helped in his shop and tended the garden. And they still sat together in the evenings, drinking coffee and listening to old music. The alien delegation prepared to leave Earth, and they asked Zara to return with them, and they promised her honor and status, and a place among the greatest of their kind, and Zara declined. And she said she had found her home here with someone who had seen her worth when no one else had. Jake and Zara were married in a simple ceremony, and the whole town attended, and people brought gifts and apologies, and they celebrated the union of human and alien, and the papers called it the wedding of the century. But for Jake and Zara, it was just another day in their life together, and after the ceremony they went home and sat on the porch watching the sunset. And Zara leaned against Jake and whispered that she had never imagined finding such happiness. Jake smiled and said that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances on people others have given up on. And Zara agreed, and together they watched as the stars came out one by one, filling the sky with lightnings past, and Zara used her abilities to help Earth advance, and she shared knowledge, carefully guiding human scientists to breakthroughs in energy and medicine and transportation. And she never took credit and always worked behind the scenes.